Now that we're here and present and grounded, I have the joy and the honor of introducing our speaker tonight. So, Teresa Thompson is a Catholic writer based in Brooklyn, New York, and her work has been published by G's Magazine, FutureChurch, Catholic Women Preach, and Ignatian Solidarity Network. And you can also read her work on her Substack, which is called Liturgy of the Hours, Ours, which I think is brilliant. Teresa is also a Bernardin Scholar at Catholic Theological Union and a board member of the Metro New York chapter of Call to Action. And she serves as part of the Catholic Lesbians ministry at the Church of St. Francis Xavier. Originally hailing from the Caribbean and Ireland, Teresa worked in New York City's public mental health system for 7 years before founding her private practice, where she specializes in providing psychotherapy for complex trauma and religious trauma. She loves being a friend, a sister, a daughter, a wife, and a mother. Please join me in welcoming Teresa.
Thank you, Martha. Thank you, Russ. I hope everyone can hear me okay. It's really wonderful to be here with you all today, especially being that it's Juneteenth. I'm really glad that in recent years, this has become a more national celebration of America's emancipation of enslaved peoples. As Martha was just mentioning, I come from the Caribbean. So in a few weeks, I will celebrate St. Croix's Emancipation Day, which is very, very similar to Juneteenth. It commemorates the end of slavery in St. Croix and the neighboring islands around St. Croix in 1848, so a few years before the US. What happened there was there was a popular uprising across the island. And just the strength of this and the force of this uprising forced the colony's Danish governor to publicly declare all unfree in the Danish West Indies are from today free. So that's what we always remember on July 3rd. On St. Croix, Emancipation Day, it's an occasion for food, festivities, blowing conch shells, like a local form of like a horn, parades, all these things that contribute to reveling in the joy of freedom that was wrested from the hands of enslavers. However, the reality as well is that the island still remains saddled with a great deal of unfreedom. Like the rest of the US Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, St. Croix remains a colony. Now it's a colony of the United States. So the island's people are subject to the rule of the president, Congress, but also are unable to participate in electing them. Even the self-government of local affairs are limited. For example, judicial appointments are awarded in part by the president. And across the island, you kind of see this like disrepair that happens when the person responsible for the space doesn't live there. Right? There was a very devastating hurricane, Hurricane Hugo in 1988, and some of the ruins of the buildings that it destroyed, still lay there. They're still present. I am getting ready for the birth of my son this August, and as I prepare for this change in life, as I prepare to guide a human being through his first chapters. And I've been wondering how to one day explain to him, this kind of like messy moral reality of being an American of color. Now, on one hand, we are wrapped and constricted, by the racist structures and ideologies of American government and culture. Now we see our options, our opportunities, and our personhood stifled. But we are also complicit in that same dynamic of the subjugation of others, at home and abroad, through the various policies and actions of those same American forces that declare it must take in the best interest of us, its citizens. So Emancipation Day really informs how I experience Juneteenth. I rejoice in the freedoms seized by Black Americans when the Civil War delivered the fatal blow to chattel slavery. And I also dream about when that freedom will become more perfect, when it will become complete. This can only, of course, come about through the liberation of those living in other manifestations of hell similar to slavery. The colonized, the trafficked, the imprisoned and detained, the exploited, and those dying in genocide in Gaza and across the world. I also honor the forms of freedom we have that forever exist outside and beyond the experience of subjugation. And perhaps most important of these are the freedom of loving and being loved by one another and by God, and the freedom to choose, to resist, and disobey all forms of unholy law. Juneteenth and Emancipation Day speak to our Catholic understanding that the heaven on earth promised to us by Jesus is both already and not yet here. As liberal or progressive Catholics, we often focus with good reason on the aspect of not yet here. I think we feel deeply the ways that the church urgently needs to change, and we have great dreams of what the church could be. However, sometimes we can overlook the ways in which heaven is already here. We are already the church that we dream of. Church is the monthly meeting of my parish's Catholic Lesbians ministry. We all crowd into an upper room in the administrative offices of our church, bringing Fritos and Milano cookies to break bread. And we have coffee or seltzer standing in for drinking wine. Our lesbian or queer identities are what bring us together, but we hail from Queens, Nebraska, Cuba, the Philippines, Ireland, Hawaii, and a lot of places in between. Some of us are married and some of us are single. Some of us have children or even grandchildren. Some of us are just starting or restarting careers. Others are long retired. We pray together, share each other's joys and sorrows, and we love our God in a way that is entirely our own. We celebrate our lives and our love as fully Catholic. We reject being defined by a church hierarchy that does not recognize our priesthood and views our pronouns as unfit to attach to the name of God. We know that we are church already, just as we are. Last summer, I was struck by the affinity I felt for a community that on the surface seemed so different than our Catholic lesbians group, yet exuded a felt sense of defiant fidelity to God that I recognized as familiar. My wife and I were on vacation in Sicily, and on Sunday we tracked down an English language mass because I am the kind of person who likes to go to mass on vacation. And my wife, although not Catholic herself, felt it would make the spirit of her Sicilian grandmother happy to go pay her dues. Amidst some dusty back roads in Palermo, we found a huge Baroque-era church, just groaning under the weight of dust and its humid, unair-conditioned interior. Many of the pews were broken, and we soon realized with dismay that most of the fans were too. But the English Mass community had carved out a space to gather in the most functional part of the church. We quickly realized that all the people there were African immigrants, people who clearly knew each other intimately. There was a lot of boisterous hugging and laughter at the sign of peace. Children ran up and down the aisles the whole time. My wife was having like a little low blood sugar, so she tried to just surreptitiously pop a lollipop in her mouth, and the little girl next to her swiveled and put her hand out like, "Where's my lollipop?" Overall, it just gave that sense that this was the community's home. All of a sudden, the church seemed like Italy, and the space that immigrants had carved out for themselves in it, despite the marginalization that they face in society. And what is church if not a sanctuary, if not a home? These experiences of church illustrate for me how queer Catholics and Catholics of color, we already exhibit exemplary ministry and leadership. We already contain immense spiritual wisdom and insight. We already understand how to be living witnesses of mercy and joy. We know that this is not always acknowledged or recognized by the institutional church, but we must not fail to recognize it ourselves. Catholics who embrace their queer sexualities have a special insight on what love is and what sex is for. The Born This Way paradigm on sexuality has highlighted how sexual orientation is a gift we receive. As Catholics, we might say that this is how God made us when we were knit in the womb. And yet, this does not truly capture the spiritual insight, strength, and indeed choice involved in committing to live fully in our queer identities, to choose the joyful and sometimes bitter path that God laid before us, weaving through affirming family and friends, a community of fellow queer saints, and a rejecting church, and a too often hostile wider world. To insist on being a queer Catholic is an act of love for ourselves and for others who are like us, and a demonstration of faith in the goodness of God's creation. Queer Catholics are also undeniable examples of a truth about sexual relationships many Catholics know, but few are willing to really talk about. Sex has intrinsic value beyond its reproductive potential. All of us know queer people who are in sexual relationships that have borne good fruit. The experience of sex might be one of expression, embodiment, connection, joy, or a combination of all of these and more. If we can let go of the limited scope of understanding sex, solely through this model of marital heterosexual reproduction, we can enter more deeply into the mystery of what place sex holds in God's plan for humankind. Catholics who embrace trans and non-binary identities also have a unique clarity on what it means to co-create one's personhood with God. As Catholics, we know that salvation history is still unfolding. And similarly, in our own lives, we are invited to grow in understanding and spiritual maturity over time. God gradually unveils to us deeper insights and truths about who we are and the purpose of our lives. And for non-binary and trans Catholics, that involves realizing and celebrating their authentic experiences of gender. Trans and non-binary Catholics go through beautiful stages of being works in progress as they connect more fully with themselves and with God and shape their lives and their bodies accordingly. Catholics of color demonstrate how to keep your life firmly oriented toward God. Not a church that struggles to stop treating us as peripheral, and not our fellow siblings in Christ who are often eager to tokenize or assimilate us, but don't always know how to be integrated with us. We see God in our world, and we worship accordingly. We see the cross in the lynching tree. We see the dialogue between humanity and the divine in our hymns of call and response. We see God through interfaith learning in the perspectives of other spiritual seekers of color. I'm reminded of this whenever I visit New Orleans, where the Catholicism of the Black community is very much in dialogue with practitioners of Louisiana Voodoo and other religions descended from indigenous African faiths. Believers see affinities between Papa Lebat and St. Peter, Mama Yu and Mother Mary. This creates space for dynamic, expansive contemplation of the divine and how we understand God. As a Catholic of color, I love my faith. And yet I also know that I am Catholic inherently because of the colonization process. Now, at times before my family can remember, our original faiths were taken from us or suppressed so that we could function the way that colonized societies needed for us to function at that time. So the opportunity to have interfaith engagement and learning with other Black practitioners of different faiths is an opportunity as well to connect with my history. By contrast, when I visit the old Ursuline Convent Museum in the French Quarter, I encounter a white Catholicism that is also beautiful, but frozen in space and in time. Now, it's made up of carefully preserved antique paintings and fraying European lace. I get a sense of a spirituality that has stayed the same since the second it alighted on American shores. Queer people and people of color also demonstrate experiences that sure do look a lot like church, even when they're not connected at all to the institutional church. I think of pride marches, their extravagant displays, and their shouts of both delight and anger. And I connect them to carnival fetes in the Caribbean, where at the break of dawn, everyone, and I mean everyone, springs forth from their homes to go dancing and thundering en masse down the road. And I connect both of those to the Eucharistic processions of Corpus Christi, the delicate metal work of the monstrance surrounded by the sweating throngs of the crowd. Three different traditions, but also ultimately celebrating the body of Christ. Why do we under-recognize God's gifts when they come without the signed approval of the church as an institution? Why do we not trust ourselves to identify spiritual experiences, especially those that are patently filled with Catholic imagination, without the hierarchy's help? I do not mean to suggest that there is no value in leadership or that we are not deserving of servant leaders that can truly connect with the manifold faces of God's people. But let us not find ourselves stalled where leadership has failed. Our stories as queer Catholics and Catholics of color go beyond the asks for representation and inclusion that again and again have been deferred. Our stories are also ones of victory, the insistent ways that we have claimed our places in our faith and vowed belonging in our church. The stories of how we have lived lives of community, wisdom, and service to Jesus Christ anyway. The stories of daring to lead and trusting that in due time, the church will follow and catch up. In the past few decades, it's become kind of rote to say that the church in the global north is dying. As a queer Catholic of color, I see the church as fully alive. The church only looks dead from the perspective of the middle of an almost empty church building, unwilling to humble yourself or challenge your position, confusing lectures for dialogue and concessions for change. To see the church as alive, you have to stop wringing your hands about how to bring people in here. You have to embrace the faith and grace to let go of what you think you understand and open yourself up to finding the church out there.
Thank you so much, Teresa, for that really beautiful presentation that seemed felt so affirming and uh, I don't know what the right word is. Radical, I guess, is the right word. To how I'm feeling right now. I loved that you highlighted the gifts that queer Catholics, trans non-binary Catholics, Catholics of color bring to our church. These gifts that our church, I feel, in the institution, in that empty building that you talk about, is missing out on. But those gifts that are out there and those the churches and the ways of being the church that have embraced those people are benefiting from. So thank you so much for highlighting all of that. It was really beautiful.
Thank you.
All right, so we are going to open things up for some conversation and dialogue. So if you have a question for Teresa, if you have a comment on her presentation, or if there's an experience that you want to share, or just a reaction, maybe something in this presentation that gave you some hope, maybe something that maybe pushed against you a little bit that you're just acknowledging is something you need to sit with. All of that is welcome. This is a safe space for conversation and dialogue. In order to ask a question, I do ask that you just raise your hand. So there's a little react button down at the bottom of your screen. And if you click on that, you'll see a raise hand button at the bottom of that window that pops up. So just click raise your hand. That way I do know who to call on in which order. If you'd like to, you can turn your camera on, and that way I can bring you up on screen. If not, you don't need to. We can still dialogue just with your microphone open. You will have to unmute yourself. So if I do call on you, I'll just ask you to unmute. All right, I see Martha, you've got your hand up, so let me bring you up on screen here.
Awesome. Thanks, Russ. Teresa, there was a question you posed that really struck me. You said, why do we not trust ourselves to identify spiritual experiences without the hierarchy's help? And I was hoping that you'd be willing to share when it was for you that you started to trust your own experience. Did something happen where you gave yourself the freedom to trust your experience? Because I feel like there's a leap that must be taken to allow yourself the freedom to trust your own spiritual experience. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think two things come to mind on that topic. One is that I grew up as an expat. Because of my father's employment in the World Health Organization, my family moved from one country to another kind of every few years. Something that we found that was constant, but also different, everywhere we were was the Catholic Church. No, it was always, we were always able to, find our space to worship God, find our space to experience community. And the bones of it were the same, but the expression was always different. So I think from an early age, I had that sense that there is not one Catholicism, there are many. And then alongside that, I would say, it's kind of an interesting experience being like an American of color and an expat, because you kind of have this experience of like privilege and lack of privilege at the same time. So as much as there was kind of like privilege in my upbringing, there were also ways that like I've never fit into the church, right? I've never fit in because I'm a woman. I've never fit in because I'm a person of color. And I've never fit in because I'm a lesbian. And I don't know, I think somehow the more of these not fitting in that you have kind of like stacked with you, the more they like don't make any sense. Olga Segura's book on Black Lives Matter and the Catholic Church mentioned some kind of line. I can't remember exactly the way she put it, but she said, as a Dominican woman, if I stayed out of spaces that weren't made for me or didn't belong to me, I just wouldn't be anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really resonates with me. This is my church. I have a valid perspective and I have a valid voice. And I appreciate learning from dialogue with others and learning from leadership where there is something to learn. But I don't discount the wisdom that I have either.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Martha. Great question. You always ask really good questions. And I was like, I think you're just a really good listener too. So thanks, Martha. So I just wanted to read from the chat in case you haven't had a chance to see it. Teresa, Kate writes, I am so grateful for this powerful, true, beautiful homily. And it did feel that way. It felt very much like proclaiming the gospel, proclaiming the word of God. All right, and Max writes in the chat, beautiful reflection, Teresa. I would love to ask you if there are any questions that you wish white folks would ask about communities of color, particularly faith communities, or just anything you wish white folks knew or would be open to learning about communities of color.
Yeah. I truly don't mean this sassily, but I think I almost wish that they would ask less. I think the true kind of like learning and relationship building that we need to do across difference in the church involves being together and living together. I don't think the learning is going to be as simple as, jotting down some facts. I really hope that we can have just like a deeper level of engagement with one another so we can grow together.
Yeah, beautiful. Great question, Max, and beautiful response. As you were speaking, I'm remembering an experience that I had. I was in high school, and I went to an all-boys Jesuit high school here in Cleveland, and you had to do a retreat your junior year and your senior year. And I was one of those people who always wanted to be different from everyone else. So while everyone else was going on the Kairos retreat, which is a very popular, and I love the Kairos retreat, but everyone else was going on the Kairos retreat. I chose to do the Church in the City retreat. And I found myself worshiping in a Black Catholic community, and yes, there's stuff that you can intellectually learn about communities of color and faith communities of color, but what you said rings so true to me because that experience of being in that worship space um, it was a different kind of learning. It was a heart kind of
Mhm.
learning that really still to this day sticks with me. And we had a similar experience. We visited Saint Sabina's parish when the Future Church team and staff was on retreat in Chicago. And we went to Saint Sabina's, and for all of us white Catholics, it was quite the experience to be there. The booming bass and the preaching and everything, and it gave you an understanding of the Black Catholic experience that you could never read in a
Sure.
book. Um,
Yeah,
it's very beautiful.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think what you're saying is starting to remind me as well of Thomas Didymus and the risen Christ. It's like, touch me and see. It's beyond the, the words that Thomas heard from the other disciples. It was just, engaging in that real way.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautifully said. All right. If anyone else does have a question or a comment, please feel free to, like I said, either raise your hand or put a question in the chat. In the meantime, one of the things that it's not necessarily based on your presentation, but I think more on your experience and your expertise. I know, yesterday we received the decision from the Supreme Court that Tennessee's law banning gender affirming care for minors was going to be upheld. We've also received the news recently that the administration is going to be shutting down the LGBTQ suicide prevention hotline here in the United States. And I wanted to create space for you, Teresa, as a counselor, as someone who works on trauma and religious trauma, to offer any words of advice or wisdom or I, I don't think I'm looking for you to console anyone because I don't know that there is any consolation, but just create space for you to say anything you would like to say about any of that news, um, especially given your experience and expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm reminded of this line that started to come up in the first Trump administration about how the cruelty is the point. Not only is this going to hurt tangible people who are looking for these services, it's also communicating that message to the LGBTQ community more broadly. You don't matter, right? That's traumatic in and of itself. These decisions remind me how much we need each other, right? How much we need to, be there for our children, right? To be able to be spaces that children can talk to. And I hope that the day will come in the future where some of these decisions are reversed, and that's going to come about not through facts, because the facts are easy to find, right? It's very clear from the scientific literature why these hotlines are needed, why gender affirming care for trans youth is needed. It's going to come from engaging people at the heart, right? Kind of like similarly, again, from engaging people to touch me and see, understand our lives, understand our stories.
Great. Thanks so much, Teresa. That's, yeah, it's very heartbreaking news, all this stuff that's going on. But once again, it's being that, as you say, already church. This is an opportunity for all of us to already be church. I want to read another comment that just came in from the chat. And Tracy writes, I appreciate your reflection as well. I am a deaf American. And I think it's really fascinating to hear from others that are in various faith groups that hold marginalized identities, given so often that we see a majority narrative applied to the faith. So yeah, this is all intersectional. Everyone's liberation is bound up with each other's. So thank you for that comment, Tracy. Tracy, I don't know if you have anything else you want to respond to Tracy's comment.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tracy, for that comment. When I think about this similarity that different marginalized groups can have, or like the similarity in perspectives we can have, it makes me think about, being on the periphery, right? Being out the outside of something and looking in, and how there is a unique opportunity for learning that way. I think there's a kind of, how can I say? There's a little story that people say sometimes to explain, I think, the concept of white privilege. Two fish are swimming in the water, and one fish says to the other, how's the water? And the second fish says, what's water, right? I think the perspective from the peripheries, it helps you know what water is. So I think that's something that we often have in common.
Excellent, thank you. Let's see. Yeah, this is beautiful. Kate in the chat writes, for a church that claims to be universal, we sure have been diminishing ourselves. But as you say, the church is living outside of the walls of buildings. Yeah, that's beautifully put, Kate. Thank you. All right, let me do this here. I'm going to go ahead and remove our spotlights. And there we go. Now we can see everyone. I want to thank you again, Teresa, for joining us today to help us continue this Pride Month series, and to also mark Juneteenth, and stand in solidarity as marginalized people, working together, recognizing that we're all in this together. We are all the body of Christ. So thank you so much, Teresa.
Thank you. It was great to be here with everyone.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's always such a pleasure to be with all of you, whether you're the regular Future Church people or whether you're someone who might just be joining for the first time. It's really a gift to be in community with all of you, even through these virtual means. It just is really a beautiful way that we show up for ourselves and for each other. So thank you.